Well, there's no doubt about it. Winding Ways sure does have a lot of pieces to it. But surprisingly, this is actually one of the simpler blocks to stitch of the curved blocks, because the curve that's here is so gentle, it's really almost like sewing on a straight line. So when I stitch curved blocks, the only additional tool that I use is a pair of tweezers, and these are bent head tweezers. And I use my 1/4 inch piecing foot, and for my machine it has a metal flange on the side, so that's great as a guide, and you'll see that foot a little bit more closely when we start stitching. So this Winding Ways block, let's just point out the shapes here. Shape A is the center piece, shape B are the corner pieces, and shape C are these really narrow pieces that go down the center and cross the block. Incidentally, if you use electric quilt for quilt designing or quilt layouts, this block is known as 4-leaf clover. So if you want to do a layout experimenting with color, that's just a hint for you. So let's get started. The first thing that you want to do is actually stitch A to B. And it's easy to get confused, especially as this block starts getting stitched more. So what I like to do is stitch the same pieces together so that I get kind of a rhythm going. Shape A and shape B are easy to tell because they're going to curve into each other. So I don't know if you can see that on the screen here, but their curves will match here, so you can see that those curves match. And if you flip A around accidentally, they won't match. So if you lay your pieces out, you'll see that pretty easily. When I'm stitching this, and let me just get in a little bit closer here so that you can see me aligning these shapes. When I'm stitching this, the first thing that I'm going to do is place right sides together. And if you'll notice, the block that I finished, just so that this isn't confusing, I'm doing 2 blocks with 2 different colorways. So the block that I showed you has shape B is actually the purple color, and the block that I'm actually going to be stitching, block B, is white. So just keep that in mind as you're stitching this together. So what I'm going to do is place right sides together, and the AccuQuilt dies have these really great notches that are on each of the pieces so that you can match them up, and they also dog-ear the corners so that you know how to line them up. So I'm going to flip shape B on top of shape A so that it's right sides together, and you always want to stitch with the curved shape, the outside curve on the top, because that's the one that you're stretching, that's going to be stretching to meet the other piece. So I am aligning those 2 edges so that the edges are straight, and I'm just going to take a couple of stitches here. So I've put this under my 1/4 inch foot, and I've made sure that shape A is on the bottom and it is meeting the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. So you want shape A always to be at your 1/4 inch because that's the one that you're going to be watching. So I've taken just a couple of stitches, and now I want to lift up shape B and swing it over so that it's going to meet A. So as I'm stitching here, I'm always going to be trying to meet these 2 pieces together, but I'm lifting on the top shape because I want them to meet under the needle. So I'm going to hang on to this, keep a firm grip, but don't stretch it too much. You want to make the notches match, and I'll just take a couple of stitches here so you can actually see the notches come up on the screen. So as I'm stitching, I'm just making sure that shape A is along the 1/4 inch, and I'm holding shape B to meet it. I also have a video on Rob Peter to Pay Paul that demonstrates this same technique, and the curve for Rob Peter to Pay Paul is much more severe than the curve on the Winding Ways shape. So it doesn't take a whole lot to get these shapes to meet. You can stitch as slow or as fast as you want. I tend to go a little bit slower You might find once you get a rhythm here, you can stitch this pretty fast. But I just stitch that so that the notches meet at the center, and now I'm using my tweezers here to grab shape B because I can't fit my fingers under the needle, and I don't think I want to. So I'm using the tweezers to just hold shape B up so that I can get both of those two shapes to meet under the needle. And if it doesn't meet just quite exactly, you do have a tiny bit of wiggle room here because that's in the seam allowance. So you'll let that get stitched off. So what you end up having, if I pull out a little bit here, what you end up having is these two shapes stitched together. You want to always press your seams so that it's toward shape B. And as you see this block come together, you'll see why the pressing becomes so important. But basically what we're doing is we're pressing the seams away from where we're going to take other stitches so that the seam allowances are pressed out of the way. So you want to be careful because all of these shapes have bias edges, so as you're pressing, be careful to press and not iron, and just make sure that you're pressing that seam toward shape B. So you're pressing it toward the corner here. So you'll want to take all of those pieces and stitch those together just like this. And like I said, you will have two alternating units, one with the color, the lighter color on the outside and the darker color on the inside or in the center, and then you'll have another block that's opposite. So you're always cutting winding ways with two colorways. And as you get more experience with winding ways, you will come up with lots of other color variations, I'm sure, where you can have some really neat interlocking designs. Okay, the next piece that we're going to stitch here is I'm going to stitch shape C to this A and B unit. And what I'm going to do here is make sure that shape B is on my right and shape C is on the left. And the reason for this is because this AB unit has a curve. It has an outside curve, and so I want that outside curve to be on the top. Also, if I position this in the corner, I can see how these two shapes are going to meet and make sure that I'm stitching them together in the right order. Once you get to this point, it is easy to flop these around and actually stitch the shape to the wrong side. Don't ask me how I know. I do have a seam ripper handy. Alright, so with right sides together, I'm flipping the AB unit on top, and I'm going to match the two top edges so that they match, and those are going to go under the needle, and I'm going to take a couple of stitches just like I did before and stitch those together. Matching the notches, so you're going to just pull ever so slightly as you stitch to make those two match under the needle. And then as I get close to the end, I switch to the tweezers and use that to help me pull this shape under as I finish sewing it. So this is the shape that results. So you now have an A, B, C unit. Now that I have this A, B, C unit, I actually am going to attach another AB unit on the other side. So you can start to see winding ways taking shape. So just with 3 seams, and I'm going to do a fourth one, I'm halfway done with this block. So it's a lot of pieces, but you'll find that it goes together fairly quickly. So again, I've actually flipped these around because I want the concave shape on top. So I have my AB unit on the right and my ABC unit on the left. So I'm going to flip these right sides together, and this has a seam. And I forgot to mention, actually, when you are doing this ABC unit, you're pressing the seam away from C. So press the seam toward the AB unit, because we want to get that seam allowance out of the way. And that's particularly important because when we get to this spot here, this is such a very narrow edge that if the seam allowance is in the way, that's going to make it really hard for us to make that nice 1/4 inch seam very close to here. So you're pressing the seam away from C. Alright, so the AB unit is right sides together on top of the ABC unit, and we're going to stitch these. So again, I come in here and I take just 1 or 2 stitches just so that I'm in the unit, and I take hold of AB, which is on top, swing it around and start stitching. Now if you're doing a perfect 1/4 inch seam, you're actually going to be stitching this right next to the other seam. So this one is a little bit, it's a little bit tricky because you're trying to work with such a narrow piece there. But if you just kind of take it slow and hang on to that piece and come down, you should be stitching right next to that edge. Alright, so I've got those pieces in the machine, and you can see these are getting chain stitched fairly easily here. So the next step, you're going to make 2 of those. So you'll have this piece and that piece that I just finished. Let me take that out and show it to you. I'm just chain piecing here. So you're going to have 2 of those for this block. So you'll have the top half and the bottom half, and those will be symmetrical, and they'll get assembled like this. So again, you're pressing your seams away from C. And what we're missing here are the 2 units on the side. So you have 2 C units on the side. So you're going to take your remaining 2 C units and do something a little bit unusual. You're going to put those 2 C units right sides together, and you're going to stitch, you're going to make a 1/4 inch seam on this very narrow edge. So we're going to take our piece here, and again, those were your 2 remaining C units, right sides together. We're taking a 1/4 inch seam here to stitch these together. And then you're going to press this seam open. So once you get that stitched, you're going to take that and press the seam open. Like so. Okay? And this is such a small seam that I can just take it with my fingers and just finger press it and get that seam to lay flat. The next step in this process is you're actually going to take the 2 C units here, and you're going to pin it right sides together just at the center. Now I don't use pins on a lot of these stitches, but this is one point on this block where you do want to use a pin because you're really trying to make those seams match in the middle, and I don't want to leave that one to chance. So I am going to take a pin and just pin that to the top unit. Okay, now again, I want to stitch with the curved shape, the outside curved shape on top. So that center pin is a little bit awkward, but you still need to take this and you're going to have to rotate the unit on top so that you can get the top edges to meet. So you want those straight edges to meet at the top. And this is a little bit easier once you get a couple of stitches started in the unit. So I've taken a couple of stitches here, and now I'm sort of maneuvering this piece so that I can stitch up to the notch. So I'm going to put my fingers in there so that I can take hold of shape C and just keep it out of the way and make sure that it's following that 1/4 inch. So this gets a little bit easier once you get toward the other side, but you're just stitching here all the way down to the notch, And then once you get past the notch, it's pretty much a straight shot across to your pin. And now that I'm here, I don't want to stitch over my pin, so I'm going to take that out of the way. And then once I get up to that spot, I've stopped with my needle down in the center, and now I can just take this and finish off this unit. Just like so. Okay. Now again, you're going to take that piece, and once that is done, you're going to press the seam away from the 2C unit, so you're pressing toward the curves. Hopefully you can see that. So you've pressed that seam toward your centerpieces actually. So we're moving that seam out of the way because our next stitch is going to be right along this edge. So that seam allowance is going to be very nicely out of the way. So hopefully I have a unit here that's been pressed. Can't promise it, but somewhere in here I've got a unit here that I can use. Alright, so I'm going to again take the 2C units on top of my my top unit, and I'm going to match the centers and put a pin there, just to make sure that center is aligned. But again, I'm stitching with the outside curve on top, so I'm going to wiggle this around a little bit to get those edges to match nicely. Get that under my machine, take a couple of stitches, get this oriented the right way here so it gets a little bit more, I wouldn't call it fussy, but it's a bigger unit obviously, so you have just a little bit more fabric to deal with, but you're just following that stitch. And again, when you come to this point, as you get closer, you should be stitching right next to your other seam line, and because you did a very nice job pressing, that seam allowance is not in your way. So I'm stitching up to the pin but not over it. I just wanted to make sure that my centers were going to match. And I'm giving it a little bit of help because even though I'm not stitching that seam, it is a little bit bulky for my presser foot to get over. So I've just yanked on it a little bit to get over that hump. And now I am smooth sailing toward the end, using my tweezers to come to that point. Okay, we'll take it out of the machine and see what we've got. Again, you're going to press that seam away from the center, and that's going to give you a very nice flat area. So I'll do a little bit of finger pressing here, and voila, we have finished Winding Ways. So you should be all set. So have fun with your Winding Ways die. Happy quilting!